This story begins near Mount Fuji, which suddenly began to erupt. On the bus near this game, there were young people who said that due to the urgent evacuation, they did not take anything and they would need to replenish supplies in the store, and the man, meanwhile, said that underwater earthquakes had only recently claimed the lives of tens of thousands of people, and soon they will reach their city, so they decided to urgently evacuate them. In the very back seat sat a man with dark hair who said that loss of supplies and natural disasters are just the tip of the iceberg and people need to open their eyes because the end of the world is approaching. The young people immediately turned on him and said that he would just come. After all, if this is really so, then he will be looking forward to it because then they will all finally be able to stand up different. Our hero, meanwhile, seriously looked into his eyes, with the thought that they would never become equal and even at the end of the world there would not be a single day when everyone would become equal because he personally experienced this. In a past life, he was an ordinary food delivery man, but suddenly the apocalypse came to his world. Due to an anomaly in solar energy, the Earth's core began to rapidly expand and the atmosphere increased sharply, and the lithospheric plates began to move and monsters hiding underground came to the surface and the whole world changed in an instant. It was a new world, where there was a new order. It was a world of extreme scarcity of even a simple package of noodles or sausage. While our hero was thinking about this, a girl sat down next to him and said that what he had just told her scared her a little. But the guy immediately stood up and said that he had more important things to do. As soon as he got off the bus, he started thinking, what is the most important thing during the apocalypse? He thought with a smile that naturally these were supplies. So now he was going to sneak into the store. He thought that in his previous life, he spent all his time searching for these very supplies, but now he must have everything ready in advance. As soon as our hero returned to his work, his boss said that for being 21 seconds late, he would deduct half of his daily salary, and our hero immediately apologized. He began to think that when the apocalypse came in a past life, his boss immediately came running and his annual salary went to the cat. And these reserves will be his compensation. He went inside and used his power to steal all these supplies into his space. The system immediately began to say that rice, vegetable oil, meat had been detected and all this would be automatically moved to its space. Over the hero, meanwhile, he rejoiced and, with his arms outstretched, shouted that his ability is a distortion of space and while I was actively going at his request, everything around him will move into a pocket area with sides of 10,000 meters and this provides great convenience for purchasing supplies with zero costs. He also recalled that recently, with the help of this power, he drained 2 freshwater lakes and robbed several cities that were destined to be destroyed. The guy reasoned that in the apocalypse, even a bag of noodles has become a luxury. Not to mention they are fresh and time has stopped here, so the food will always remain fresh. He cried because he remembered his past life and was glad that he would finally need to eat dirt as it was then, and everything would be fine for him. He opened his system and saw that he had collected a lot of supplies and decided that now that he finally had so many supplies, he could finally exhale in peace. Immediately after this bottle, unknown people came in and said that you think they need help to unload all these goods from here. But as soon as they opened the door, they saw that there was nothing here. They stood in the middle of a completely empty room, braiding and couldn't believe their eyes. Our hero immediately began to be asked, where are all the products that were here? The guy smiled and said that, in fact, he personally took them all for himself. They immediately started pointing fingers at him and saying that he couldn't afford to take so much at once, after which the boss ordered the other 2 employees to quickly catch him. The guy smiled and said goodbye, saying that he would never be late again. Immediately after these words, he bent into his teleport, and found himself on the street, thinking that this is his second ability, and spatial movement is really a convenient thing in everyday use. He thought that with the help of this ability he would be able to penetrate abandoned objects, in search of supplies and leave them safely, and even standing face to face with the mutant at a critical moment, he would be able to discover his ability, and it would save his life. After that, our hero undressed and announced that the zero-cost purchase operation had been successfully completed and he could relax a little. After that, his phone suddenly began to vibrate, and there was a message that at the moment the Earth is undergoing intense movement and localized natural disasters may occur, and everyone needs to adhere to safety measures and remain calm because everything is under control and this will not affect their daily life in any way. While our hero was reading this, he thought, do they really not know that the end of the world is coming? Suddenly a girl called him. He immediately picked up the phone and she asked if he really decided to leave her, because he even put the house up for sale. She started talking about how he was very naive to think that he could find a woman who would want to be together with him. The girl painted her lips after sex with some man and said that he has no responsibility at all as a man, and in general the woman doesn't care about his house and wants to feel safe. The guy calmly asked if she was finished, to which the girl replied that she did not tolerate such an attitude and ordered him to return and transfer the property to her, because otherwise he might not even think about the wedding and she was giving him a second last chance. The guy smiled and said that he was returning to one place so they say so when he returns. Immediately after that he hung up. He thought that last time, he spent 5 whole years wasted in the apocalypse. He looked for supplies to feed her, and even brought her to the safe zone. If not for him, she would have starved to death during the apocalypse. But the girl cheated on him, and together with her, our hero had to feed another person, who at some point decided that this guy was now useless and they would continue to climb together. The girl began to tell this guy that she knew everything and if this man died it was only because of his incompetence. The girl also said that she really hopes that her bull will show himself very competently this evening and satisfy her. The hero, meanwhile, was thinking that he was humiliated as a real fool in his past life, but he trusted them and this is what it led him to. He smiled and decided that this time, his future wife and her boyfriend would pay for it, and they would not get off so easily this time because the pain that he experienced, they should feel it 10,000 times stronger. After that, he exhaled resignedly and said that the remaining things can only be bought with money, but first he needs to sort out the house, and after that he will have his money. He called his realtor and said that he agreed to sell his house at half price, but on one condition: he wanted cash and right now. After some time, our hero arrived at the real estate office, and there he was already met by his girlfriend who asked if he knew how long they had been waiting for him here. He didn't answer her and simply asked her to move away and not disturb her. His girlfriend's boyfriend immediately started yelling and saying that no one allowed him to sell the house and if he tried to do this, tomorrow he wouldn't even see the sun. Our hero immediately approached him and grabbed him by the neck to say that he can do whatever he wants with his things and no one should order him. His girlfriend immediately started pulling him away from her boyfriend and saying that he was doing everything wrong, and she also started screaming and saying that there was a killer on the street. But immediately after that, he suddenly turned around and slapped her in the face. After that, he continued to strangle his girlfriend's boyfriend, who was already all blue and begging to let him go. The man smiled and told him not to worry, because he would not die as quickly as he thought. After that, he let the guy go, and his girlfriend immediately came up to him to ask how he was feeling. Our hero's girlfriend immediately turned on him and started screaming that before she gets angry, he should quickly get on his knees and apologize, because otherwise he might forget about marrying her. After that, our hero went inside the real estate company, and then he met a man who said that he would buy his house and asked what our hero thinks about this. Inside, the man was thinking that a house worth more than 1 million is selling this bouquet for only 700,000, and with the help of this guy he can make a profit of a couple of 100,000 with a quick turnover. Our hero, meanwhile, sat and drank coffee and said that this should be the full amount and asked if they could pay it today. To which the old man replied that there were no problems and they could sign all the documents right now and transfer the money and the transfer of property would be ready next Monday. The guy smiled and took the documents, thinking inside that at such a time, anyone can choose any house they like if they dare to live in it. After that, he opened his phone and saw a notification that 700,000 yuan had been transferred to his balance. Despite various natural disasters, his home was in the heart of the Central Plains and the apocalypse would only happen in a month. He thought about all this, but suddenly he saw that on one of the poles there was an advertisement that they were giving quick loans with high interest rates. He immediately called this company and asked if he could report his property with a certificate of ownership. He was told that he could do this, and on the same day he arrived at the fast center, where he was told that his house, in principle, was not worth very much. The man said that the maximum his company could borrow was only 500,000, but first he needed to leave certificate of ownership. The guy immediately got up and put his hand on the table and said that if the man reports another 100,000, then he agrees, and our hero also said that in exactly a week he will double his profit and return everything back. The man began to think that in front of him was a gambler who, for the sake of a bet, would sell even his own parents. Inside he mocked this man and thought that he was stupid for thinking that he could change everything. But in fact the man said that they cooperate as long as the mortgage of the real estate remains in their companies. On the same day, a transfer of 600,000 yuan from Quick Loans arrived on our hero's phone. Our hero's ex, meanwhile, was thinking that she just wants to return to her house, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this guy dared to raise his hand against her, and he had to pay for it. And this girl's new boyfriend said that he would make this freak pay and ordered his elder brother to kill him. The woman looked ahead and was surprised to notice that it was her ex-boyfriend coming. The man then asked his girlfriend what he was doing here, to which she replied that they should go and follow him to see what he was doing these days. Our hero, meanwhile, argued that as far as he remembers, many commercial buildings were destroyed under the influence of water outflow and froze in extreme cold, but this hotel called the Green City withstood all natural disasters to the end. Also, our hero thought that according to rumors there is a presidential suite here, and it is very well equipped, and there is even a swimming pool, and this place is ideal for creating a base. And it would be nice to live here for a very long time. He also thought that despite the fact that many warehouses are empty, there are no shortages of hot dishes and ingredients. As soon as our hero walked inside, a girl immediately approached him, greeted him and said that she was the manager of this restaurant in the hotel, and asked how she could help. The man raised his finger up and said that he urgently needed to book 1,000 tables for a banquet and asked if she could do it. The girl was surprised and asked why he needed a whole bunch of tables. But after that she realized that a very rich man was standing in front of her and said that they had a table for 5,000, for 10 and also for 30 and 100,000. Inside she thought that this was simply amazing, and this young man with such a majestic behavior actually hidden rich man of the second generation. The guy smiled and said that he wanted all the tables to cost 10,000, because the sum alone would be 10 million. He also added that he would pay a deposit of 50,000. He also said that they would all have to prove it at the specified address, and he would pay the rest through week. The girl meanwhile thought that their hotel did not quite meet such high standards. The girl here had already started smiling and saying that he could pay a deposit of 50,000 right now, and he just needed to wait a little inside. She thought that only the cost of the ingredients amounted to so much money. But the opportunity to contact these rich people is definitely worth it, because the most important part is you in business. Learn to be patient. The girl led the guy inside and asked how she could address him, to which our hero replied that his name was Suchin. I asked him if he was getting married, to which the guy did not answer that he was, and asked to help him book the presidential suite. As soon as he left the hotel, he smiled and said that this is incredibly cool, because now he has dishes for 10 million when paying a deposit of 50,000, and as for the rest of the payment, it doesn't matter to him because the apocalypse will soon happen. The girl, meanwhile, smiled and said that this was very good, and said that she had already booked the presidential suite for the newlyweds. And the girl who is marrying our hero is really happy. As soon as our hero left, young people immediately approached the girl and asked what this guy was just talking about here. The girl asked if she could find out who they are for this man. The girl with pink hair replied that his name is Suchun, and he is her boyfriend. The manager looked and said that her boyfriend had just ordered a banquet for 1,000 tables from them, and he paid 50,000 deposit. She also said that having a guy like him is a great success. And inside the manager was thinking that the girl who is now standing next to her is pulling the maximum on a 7 yes, and in terms of temperament she is terrible, so why do rich people choose such idiots? Meanwhile, the girl began to worry and said that it simply couldn't be that her boyfriend had money for a banquet worth tens of millions. The manager got on her phone and started talking about how rich people often hide their identity in order to find love because they are afraid that their partners may be after their money and therefore reveal it only on their wedding day. The girl began to say in surprise that it would be a great gift for her wedding, and now she understands why he suddenly disappeared and started acting cold, and her real boyfriend said that he couldn't believe that this guy was really incredibly rich. Meanwhile, the manager took out her phone and showed that he had just transferred her a huge sum of money as collateral. After that, They went out into the street and were happy, and this girl's real boyfriend asked about a banquet for 1,000 tables and asked who she thought he had invited, to which his ex immediately stated that everything was obvious, but he wanted to introduce his girlfriend to his rich circle and reveal your personality. The man immediately blushed and extended his hand to take her breast and asked what they would do in this case, to which the girl replied that she needed to take the initiative and create an opportunity for this sycophant. Inside, she was already thinking that she would soon be incredibly rich and said that she could not imagine that such a scenario would happen in her life, because it was unexpected that it would be with this saint named Suchin. Meanwhile, our hero was already at home, and was thinking that if he didn't take out another loan, then it would all be useless, because if he spends it, he'll spend it to the fullest. On this day, Suchin downloaded more than 80 apps at the same time and took selfies 30 times, and the loan amounts ranged from 30,000 to 30 yuan. Well, luck finally smiled on him, and the bank approved him a loan of almost 1 million. He lay down to rest, but immediately got up, in the sense that he shouldn't waste time, because he still needs to buy a lot. He thought that fireplaces, ice makers, ice blocks, smokeless coal, all this is not available in regular supermarkets. But fortunately it can be bought online and delivery is very fast. He thought that it didn't matter if there were severe frosts or extreme heat, because whether he would survive all this depended only on whether he had enough of the necessary things. After that, he called someone and stated that he needed 200 tons of smokeless coal. He also said that the price suited him and first he would give them a deposit of 500,000 yuan, and the remaining amount would be paid upon receipt of the goods. He also repeated with all the other necessary things that everything would be dropped off only upon the arrival of the goods. When he left the house, he suddenly noticed a girl who greeted him and said that they actually knew each other. He noticed that his ex-girlfriend was standing next to him, and the girl with dark hair said that they had not seen each other for a very long time and she missed her very much. He recognized her as his old friend who always slandered him behind his back along with his ex-girlfriend. He looked at them in surprise and asked with disgust, did she really miss his home? The girl with dark hair immediately began to say that the girl was just testing him, and asked why he was so stupid if he didn't know how sad his girlfriend was. And his ex immediately came up to our hero and said that you are so yesterday she felt very bad and because of this she lost her temper and yelled at him. Yesterday she asked him not to be angry and said that she was asking him to keep her company. The man briefly replied that he was busy today and invited the girl to take a walk alone. She looked at all this, and at how he walked away and asked, doesn't he look too arrogant? They noticed that this guy got into a taxi and immediately opened the door of the second taxi to see where he was going because this must be the last test for this girl. Our hero, meanwhile, went on an important issue, and was immediately greeted by a fat man who said that he was surprised that the customer was so young. Our hero replied that they had already discussed all the details on the phone and asked how long it would take to deliver 2,000 tons of edible ice. The entrepreneur immediately laughed and said that he didn't have much to brag about in their factory, but when it comes to efficiency, it's definitely the best, and in just 3 days they can deliver everything they need and it will cost about 800,000 yuan. Our hero took out his phone and said that he would transfer 100,000 as a deposit and asked them all to deliver everything to the address he gave them. The man immediately began to smile and hold out his phone so that our hero could scan the QR code. After this, the man asked why our hero needed so much ice. Is there really some kind of large-scale event planned? And the man also stated that he was very glad to cooperate with such a young and rich man. Chin started getting into the taxi and saying that he plans to donate all this ice to charity. The entrepreneur remained standing near the place where the taxi had just been and thought that this young guy had just concluded a deal for almost 1 million so quickly. After that, he saw that another taxi car had parked. Our hero's ex immediately came out and said that this man was her fiance and asked the entrepreneur what they had just talked about. The entrepreneur did not understand what she was talking about and said that this man bought 1 million worth of ice. Our hero's ex and her friend heard this information and immediately began to scream, thinking that now everything is clear and Chin is simply incredibly rich. The entrepreneur also thought a little and added that this young man said that he would donate all this ice to charity. Meanwhile, our hero headed to the restaurant with the thought that he had finally bought everything he needed and now it was time to enjoy the time before the apocalypse, because in a past life he was too busy with work. Not to mention visiting trendy restaurants, and even going to a small cafe was luxury for him. The waiter approached our hero and he opened the menu, seeing that these were truly upscale restaurants with 4-digit price tags. He reached the last page and saw what? Sold for 17,000 yuan. The waitress saw that our hero was a little puzzled and explained that this dish was personally prepared by the chef of their music restaurant, and the ingredients depend on the inspiration of the chef. Our hero listened to all this and said that it all sounded interesting and advised us to start with that. He turned to the right and began to take out some book with thoughts that in a past life at the beginning of the apocalypse, a strange force caused many creatures to mutate. He opened a book with mythical creatures and thought that the monstrous snake mentioned in this book appeared in the midst of a flood and resembles the mutated snake that he encountered in his previous life. He thought a little and said that instead of mutation, he prefers to call it atavism. Atavism is the appearance in individual organisms of a given type of characteristics characteristic of distant ancestors but absent in the closest ones, that is, lost during evolution. And while I was explaining this, the chef of this restaurant finally came to Chin. The girl greeted our hero with a warm smile, and said that she was very glad to see him in this restaurant. She also said that she was a local chef, and said that she prepared the dish in her hands especially for our hero based on his temperament. Our hero saw the girl and was surprised because he recognized her as the hellish cook Duanya. In a past life, during the apocalypse, the hellish chef had the magical culinary skill of turning decay into food and no one could repeat before such a treat. But these dishes were prepared using the source of mutation of monstrous beasts, and eating them would lead to certain death. The girl looked at our hero, who was not shy at all, and looked at her. Inside she thought that he had an expression as if he was afraid that she would poison his food. The girl swallowed and said that this dish is called double life, and on the one hand tuna is fried here in butter, and on the other hand, deep-fried in puff pastry, and this is a type of steak with 2 different tastes that leaves a lasting impression. The guy immediately began to eat the food and talk about how it was very tasty and really worth the money. But inside he was thinking about what the girl could cook for him during the apocalypse. But he immediately put these thoughts aside because he was afraid that she might poison him. Our hero's ex, together with her friend, were still following Chun and discussing that the dishes in this restaurant cost at least 10,000, and that the girl would soon become the wife of a rich man. In the evening, our hero went to some bar with the thoughts that some rich guy spent 2 million here and didn't even see what abalone looks like. But there won't be such extravagant places in the apocalypse, so he would regret not visiting in such a place this time. Chun sat surrounded by beautiful women and had a great time. Suddenly, our hero noticed a girl who had been sitting all evening and couldn't say anything. Her friends immediately began to explain that the girl was here for the first time and her boyfriend had cheated on her, and that's why he didn't bring her here to have fun. The girl heard this and said that her ex was a real scumbag, and did not sleep with his girlfriend, but cheated on her with an old woman, and he was completely devoid of taste in women. After which she looked at our hero and asked, "Do men really not care who to attack?" "What is our?" The hero replied that the nature of a real man is on his bones with the help of reproductive desires. The girl drank a glass of gin in one gulp, and immediately sat down closer to our hero, asking if he was free tonight. Our hero's ex, along with her friend, meanwhile, were also in the bar and were watching Chin. Suddenly they saw that this guy was cheating on his ex-girlfriend. Our hero, meanwhile, pressed the girl, who had recently been thrown closer to him, and asked her to go outside for a while the girl, meanwhile, was thinking inside that this guy was incredibly musical. After that they headed upstairs, but our hero was stopped by his ex-girlfriend. He ignored her words, and taking this girl by the arm, he ran with her to some room. The man apologized for the fact that they crossed paths with some shady characters in the corridor, and the girl looked down, saying that this would be her first time. The guy immediately gave her a slap and told the girl to wake up and started talking about her not leaving the house because she was grazing on food. He also said that people who are obsessed with love should not come to such places, and in the future she should forget about it. He immediately closed the door behind him and thought that such an opportunity rarely comes along, but leaving like that is really a big loss. As soon as he closed the door, he saw that his ex was standing in the corridor with her girlfriend, and was trying to break into the doors of his neighbors. After 3 days, a delivery finally arrived to our hero, who asked him where all the things he ordered should be placed, and he answered everything that they should simply move everything into the house, and leave it as convenient as possible, but only so that they do not block entrance, and could continue moving. Our hero's ex, along with her new boyfriend, stood in this crowd and were surprised that Chin had rented a huge warehouse and ordered a lot of huge drugs that are now being moved to the warehouse. Suddenly, this girl's friend noticed that they had also arrived from the restaurant, and that a huge banquet was planned. They looked around and saw that even red carpets had been laid out. Then the girl looked at her friend and asked what she thought. Is it possible that her ex-boyfriend will suddenly propose to her, and guests will appear? The girl began to smile and say that even if this guy proposed to her, she still might not agree. But after thinking a little, she said that they should go inside and look at his sincerity. The girl finally found her ex-boyfriend and asked why he buys so much, and what is going on here. The man looked her straight in the eye and said that she could help move things, and then he would tell her what they were doing here when they were finished. The girl immediately thought about it, and inside she swore at Chen, thinking that she was going to become a rich lady and would not do such hard work. But then her friend came up and said that this should be a test for her to find out if she is suitable to become a rich lady. The girl immediately took the boxes and with a smile began to talk about the fact that she was actually not a sissy. The girl was carrying huge boxes with thoughts that to become rich or alone you need to be comprehensively developed, and if she passes the test, then this guy will definitely marry her today. This girl's friend also took one of the boxes and said that she would gladly want to help. Inside she was thinking that all the rich people in the second generation are very lustful, and if she shows herself even a little, even if she cannot become his woman, she will at least she can remain his mistress and live a great life. Meanwhile, our hero was thinking that we couldn't let the work go to waste, because 1,000 tables of food and 2,000 tons of ice, this is a pretty huge purchase. And even if the hotel and suppliers send all the people who will still need a lot of time to translate everything. When it was already dark, our hero finally said that they had finished transporting the goods. Our hero's ex stood there, as tired as possible, and thought that this was already too much. After all, they moved things from morning to evening and didn't even eat. And if she becomes rich or that, she will definitely make all his money hers. This girl's friend also sat on her knees and talked about how this bastard made them carry such heavy things. Meanwhile, the girl was thinking that the test was finally over and now our hero should appear to announce that she is now his bride and rich people should also appear. Her friend also began to say that the food was getting cold and the guests seemed to be in no hurry. And of all from this she concluded that rich people are indeed very strange. Our hero thanked everyone who worked today and said that as a token of gratitude he was giving everyone one envelope of money and the remaining funds were transferred within a week in accordance with the contract. Suddenly, our hero's ex appeared and asked if he wanted to tell her something. The man immediately answered briefly that he was very grateful to her for helping, but also stated that there would be no payment. The girl immediately began to tell him not to joke like that, and she was sure that he must have a surprise. She said that the sooner they get married, the sooner they will heal very well. The guy smiled and said that he would really like to live well, but he not only sold his house but also owed a lot of money. He was silent for a while and asked the girl, does she still want to be next to him? This girl's friend immediately started saying that this can happen because he spent tens of millions on everything else, and says that he is poor after spending so much. The man looked at her proudly and said that if they started talking about this, he was ready to tell that there was one big boss who wanted to do a good deed, so he helped. He also said that they want to attract people to a project to combat poverty in African countries. Our hero's ex immediately attacked him, and said that she would never forgive him for lying all the time. But the guy easily dodged her and the girl fell. He looked down at her and asked where did he manage to lie to her. The girl lay on the floor and said that he was a dirty whorer who was deceiving everyone and that in fact he was not richer in the second generation, but just an ordinary beggar, and he could forget about marrying her. The guy looked at her contemptuously and asked who even needs a money hunter like her. The girl, her friend, immediately began to leave and says that he is a real freak and very soon they will make him regret all the things he did today. Looking at them, he said that they were complete idiots, and when the apocalypse came they would cry. As soon as he closed the door to this huge warehouse, he was glad that finally all the supplies and resources were ready, and now he could only wait for the onset of the apocalypse. He looked at all his goods once again, and used the opening of subspace to transfer them. Meanwhile, our hero's ex returned to her new boyfriend, and he told her that this guy treated her very badly, and she should have turned against him long ago and instead be with him. The girl apologized and said that she was looking forward to action from her new boyfriend. The man proudly said that he would take care of this girl and also avenge her. The girl inside was thinking that this new guy of hers is actually pretty good, and his older brother is quite rich, and being with them is better than with her ex sycophant. Meanwhile, our hero was sitting next to them, having a peaceful dinner, and saying that the woman who was now standing next to her victim was really not picky. Her new boyfriend immediately looked at his brother, and said that this was the guy who raised his hand against him. The older brother of our hero's ex-girlfriend's boyfriend approached Shin and called him a brat. The man came closer to our hero's table and stated that they were going to find him and break all his bones. And he also said that he did not expect that such a scoundrel would dare to touch his little brother. The younger brother looked at his older brother and asked if they really knew each other, and the older brother said that this guy mortgaged his house to him and borrowed 600,000. And tomorrow will be the repayment day, and he will have a very hard time. The girl, meanwhile, was surprised that this guy managed to borrow money from such people, and thought that he would not be able to repay his debt in his entire life. Fortunately, he said that she was no longer connected with him. Our hero, meanwhile, wiped his mouth and said that he was already tired of not being able to even enjoy good food all alone. The elder brother immediately approached our hero and said that this idiot must pay off a huge debt tomorrow, but today he decided to enjoy a luxurious life in a hotel, and this is just funny. The younger one began to say that this guy definitely wouldn't be able to repay the loan, so the older brother shouldn't waste time on him, and this useless guy should die. Suddenly, the hotel manager appeared and asked to discuss everything quietly and peacefully and not to start any quarrels. The older brother said with a smile that if the manager wants to talk, then she should make this guy kneel down and apologize to him and his brother, and then they can consider this issue resolved. The girl looked at our hero and asked what was going on here, and our hero replied that it was just nothing and there were just a few small pests in front of him. The elder brother immediately flew into a rage and slammed his hand on the table, saying that he had endured for a very long time, but today the brat would come to an end, and even if heaven came, they would not be able to help him. Suddenly, in the middle of all this booth, an unknown tall man appeared who asked what these guys are doing here. The man with a serious face looked around the room and asked who allowed them to create problems here. The elder brother immediately began to apologize and say what this man was doing here, to which Sang replied that he had important things to do today and asked not to create problems here because otherwise, they would not be able to see him for what they deserve. The elder brother, meanwhile, was thinking that the man who is standing in front of him is a famous businessman in this city, but he also has a wide network in the underworld and there are a lot of people under his command, so being his enemy is a bad idea. The elder brother, meanwhile, smiled and said that he will come to drink for him later. Our hero, meanwhile, looked at this couple and thought that during the apocalypse, this guy was the most important force in this city, and the hellish chef was also under his wing. He also thought that after the start of the apocalypse, it was rumored that the hotel that this guy runs was the first place where mutations occurred, and now it seems that the ability for which he became known as a skull crusher is explained by the early appearance of mutations here, in which case he should apologize, because this guy's ability will now belong to our hero. Meanwhile, Sang looked at our hero and thought that this guy had an interesting look. After that, Kin took the hellish cook's arm and entered one of the rooms with her. He greeted Mr. Sun and stated that he had brought Miss Duanya here as he asked. The girl looked into the eyes of this gentleman and asked what did he want to discuss with her. The man poured himself a glass of wine and said that he had heard that Miss Duan was an extraordinary beauty, and today he would finally be able to meet her in person. After that, he smiled widely and handed her a glass of wine, saying that they could celebrate their meeting. Meanwhile, our hero stood near a huge window, and thought that in a past life he hid with his girlfriend in the basement, and survived the apocalypse 2 times due to severe fat, and he never expected that this time he asks her, and in the end she will follow him like a dog. The man looked at the whole city, which opened before his eyes, and reasoned that this was a good opportunity to settle old scores with her. Meanwhile, the younger and older brothers were discussing that it was now hotter at night than during the day. The younger one said that it was so. Therefore, He suggested going to the pool to freshen up and the girls in swimsuits would come out a little later. They immediately began to hug and say that this is all, because they are brothers and the whole world lies before their feet. The girls in swimsuits, meanwhile, looked at the sky and were surprised that today the moon was unusually bright and shining like the sun. The new guy, our hero's ex-girlfriend, took her hand and said that such a moon is a testament to their love, and the girl replied that it was too hot here and asked him to hurry up and take her to the pool as soon as possible. And our hero, meanwhile, watched with a smile as their love was about to end. He raised his glass towards the moon and smiled and said that he already missed the apocalypse. Suddenly the moon began to shine even stronger and red. Everyone immediately began to run away, saying that the moonlight suddenly became unusually hot, and their skin seemed to be on fire. Those who were sitting inside were surprised that the streets suddenly became so bright and closed and began to worry about their friends who went out to swim in the pool. And these guys immediately returned back to the hotel, all wet with sweat. The others were surprised because they returned to the hotel so quickly, and were surprised that their skin was incredibly red, as if they had been burned. Following them, the older brother began to enter, begging for help, and his entire skin was covered in burns. Meanwhile, Mr. Sun looked at the hellish chef and asked why she didn't drink her glass. Sang immediately began talking about how he had prepared a banquet and offered to go there. But the gentleman meanwhile said close that no one in this city would dare not drink the wine that he personally poured, and it was none of his business. The girl, meanwhile, looked at this guard and thought that in order to get closer to San, he even set her up. The girl stood with a glass of wine and remembered the rumors that this man had drunk and poisoned a lot of girls. And today he decided to target her. She immediately realized that there was something wrong with this drink, and she definitely shouldn't drink it. Suddenly, behind her, the moon shone with a bright red light. The men immediately decided that something was wrong here and decided to go downstairs and see what was happening there. The girl exhaled with relief and put the glass back. The hotel manager, meanwhile, was telling everyone to please calm down. After all, they had already contacted the rescue team, so they needed to wait for the rescuers here. Ken looked at his brother and asked what was happening here, and he answered him that the moon had just suddenly disappeared and the temperature had risen. And now it's about 70 degrees outside, and the news reports that about 100 people have already been injured. Meanwhile, the fat gentleman called someone on the phone and said that he was now at the hotel and asked someone to send for him. But after that, he hung up the phone and said that now everyone is working to ensure that there are no problems with food and no one can come, so the situation is very difficult. Meanwhile, the older brother was covered in burns and said that every touch hurt him incredibly. And everyone else began to say that he needed to go to the hospital. But now it was too hot outside, so there was no way they could get to the hospital. The elder brother asked all the people around not to worry, and told me that he had already asked someone to come and pick them up. His friend, meanwhile, was in the underground parking lot, and said that he really felt that it was now very hot. He began to drive out of the underground parking lot, saying that he would arrive soon. He looked at the moon and could not understand why it shines as brightly as the sun during the day and why the temperature is so high. No, there's something wrong with us. The fifth rear tire got punctured and burst because of the temperature. He immediately got out of the car, cursing out loud about the heat and saying that the weather today was just crazy. He called someone on the phone and began to tell him that all the tires on his car had burst, and he was coming here now. Therefore, he needed to return. But as soon as he came out of the shadows and stepped on the asphalt with his sneaker immediately began to melt. Because of this, he tripped and fell with his whole body on the molten asphalt. He looked in front of him and saw that a burnt corpse lay next to him. He immediately decided to stand up sharply to run away, but when he started to get up he noticed that his skin was stuck to the asphalt. Meanwhile, our hero was in a hotel where the air conditioners were working at full power. He was sleeping peacefully in his bed. Meanwhile, the news reported that due to a sudden release of heat from the moon, the air temperature outside rose to 75 degrees, and the temperature of the ground reached 100 degrees. And this event had already led to almost hundreds of victims, so on TV and on all the news they asked to stay everyone indoors and avoid going outside to prevent burns to the skin and respiratory tract. Because of such fat, the city energy center could not stand it and exploded. A fat man who was burned noticed under the moonlight that the connection was lost, and his friends were saying that all the other rooms in the hotel were booked, and this was the last available room, so they would have to separate it. So our hero's ex immediately started screaming that this was not a funny joke, and she couldn't share a room with men. After that, they tried to turn on the light, but noticed that there was no electricity in this place now. Everyone immediately began to develop and say that the air conditioners had turned off and the temperature in the room was rising rapidly. They said that now the temperature was about 40 degrees Celsius, and they would suffocate if they stayed here. The unexpected girl remembered that her ex took the presidential suite, and there is a pool there, so they can go and take that pool. Our hero, meanwhile, was swimming in his pool with the thoughts that last time the city's electricity supply had hidden dangers due to improper maintenance, and no matter how much manpower was invested, the electricity in the city still exploded and all users connected to the city's network suffered. He took a towel to dry his head, thinking that this is why he specifically chose the rescue room. He also prepared vertical air conditioners and large backup batteries to ensure room temperature. He added a little more ice and lay down on his sofa, thinking that he felt much better this way. When he got hungry, he used his sunset power to summon more food from another space to satisfy his hunger. But he decided that on the first day of the apocalypse, breakfast should be simple, so he chose rice with salmon, and took chopsticks to start the meal. Suddenly, he heard that they began to close his door and say that they knew that Chin was there. He opened the door, and everyone who stood near this door suddenly noticed that it was very cool here and perhaps this guy had air conditioning. Our hero, meanwhile, looked at them angrily and asked what they all needed in his room. Everyone immediately saw that this room not only had a swimming pool, but also electricity and food. The girls immediately started talking about how he not only almost got fried on the street, but he is here enjoying luxury, and this is too selfish, so he should get out of here immediately. The fat man, meanwhile, said that our hero borrowed money from him and the time had come to return it, so he must give him this number and can count it as interest for the days. But as soon as he crossed the threshold of the room, our hero took out a pistol and shot the fat man in the stomach. He looked him straight in the eye and declared that if anyone took even one step here, he would be a dead man. Everyone immediately tensed up because they didn't understand where this guy could get a gun. The fat man was surprised that this guy even managed to get a gun, and said that he was too cruel. After that, our hero shot again at the fat man, hitting him right in the leg. He looked at everyone else, and said that they should leave here as soon as possible, because they were just wasting his time. With a serious expression on his face, he said that they must leave here immediately while he counts to 3, otherwise they will all die. Meanwhile, the manager apologized for the fact that there was no food in their hotel. She was talking about how a few days ago someone had booked 1,000 tables for a banquet, and they were almost out of ingredients, and the supply was planned for today. Mr. Sun poured a bottle of water on himself, and said that in this case they should immediately bring all the food and water they have at the hotel. Suddenly, the older and younger brother came into the corridor and shouted that the guy in the presidential suite was killing someone. Sang looked at the fat man and saw that he had a gunshot wound. He thought about the fact that not many people can pick up a weapon, and it seems like a cool character lives at the top. Our hero's ex, meanwhile, began to say that the presidential suite has electricity, air conditioning, and even a swimming pool. The girl said that this was all the real truth, and she saw it with her own eyes, and there were ice cubes, a lot of food, fried chicken and alcohol, and it just looked like heaven. Everyone immediately headed to the presidential suite to see our hero, and Sang ordered his guys to go upstairs and figure out what needed to be done. After that, a huge crowd headed to the presidential suite, and began to say that there was now an emergency situation and in the entire hotel only his room had air conditioning. They with a smile asked our hero to let them in and cool down a little. A little boy saw fried chicken on the table and immediately burst into the room screaming that he wanted to eat it. The hero immediately kicked him with all his might and right in the stomach and threw him back out the door. He briefly told parents to keep a good eye on their children, otherwise he will teach them to control their children. They immediately got angry with him and started saying that it was just a child, and they didn't understand how it could come into his head to hit this boy. People started yelling that someone like this hero didn't deserve to stay in this room, so they should drill him out. Immediately after these words, our hero took out a pistol and fired. The bullet hit one guy right in the head. He was the guy who screamed the loudest. He immediately fell to the ground, unable to believe that he had just died. After this, our hero stated that despite the fact that he is alone, they also only have one life. Meanwhile, the older fat brother was thrown out into the street because he was already infected early and began to rot, and with such a temperature and without medicine, he could not hold out any longer. The younger brother has already started shouting that everything is our main character's fault, therefore, he will definitely take revenge on him. Our hero's ex, together with her friend, meanwhile, stood near Chen's door in sexual poses, and begged him to let him in, saying that they would do whatever he wanted. He opened the door with a smile and said that if their love was so great, then he was happy to let them in. The girls were immediately happy that their real friend turned out to be very good. But the fat man's younger brother pushed them away and said that he would kill this freak right now. As soon as he began to run inside, our hero immediately took up the bat and struck him straight in the face with a swing. He also said that the girls could enter, but they would also feel the bat on their face, after which the girls began to apologize and say that they were also fine outside. Suddenly, a huge military transport stopped near this one, in which the tires were replaced with treads. Everyone who stood near the windows watched this, and were happy that the car had finally come to save them. People immediately came out of it, and began to say that everyone should disperse and give way. They also asked if academician Lu Jinghua was there. As soon as they went inside, they found this academician and said that they were a rescue team and he needed to quickly put on a protective suit and go with them. Indignation immediately began in the crowd, due to the fact that they had not arrived to save everyone. The men in the protective suit calmed everyone down, and said that the authorities had already begun a rescue operation and midnight would be the coldest time of the day and tonight they would be able to independently reach the Silicon Valley Plaza, and this is the nearest rescue point. People immediately began to rejoice that today they were saved by help, and rejoiced that the authorities had not yet forgotten about them. Mr. Sun, meanwhile, attacked one of the people and said that he would give them 1 billion if they would give him a protective suit because he wants to leave right now. They immediately tied him up and pushed him face down on the floor, saying that the academician is an expert in geology, and he plays an important role in this disaster, so no one should interfere with their work. Unexpectedly, our hero's ex came up and asked everyone to stop and be contained because there was a killer living upstairs. The second girl immediately started saying that this guy has a gun, and he has already killed 2 people, and he will soon get to them and there is no way they can let this killer go free. One of the officers immediately took off his mask and said that in this case he was forced to stay here to check everything. He also stated that he had the right to do this, and would take protective suits with him and also contact the others after he dealt with the killer. After that, the military man took the automatic weapon and began to climb to the top floor of the presidential suite. Our hero's ex, meanwhile, was glad that after this guy was shot, she could stay in this room and surrender the rescue. As soon as the military man made his way to the very top, he was surprised to notice that something was looking at him. He saw that in front of him was a camera that actively responded to all movements. From the presidential suite the door opened and someone threw a grenade. It was a stun grenade, which immediately blinded the military man. After that, he realized that another grenade had been thrown, and it was tear gas. The man thought that this all didn't look very good and he needed to retreat as quickly as possible. But our hero was already behind him, swinging his bat. A couple of hours later, the man regained consciousness, and did not understand where he was, and why his eyes were stinging so much. He also thought that it was very cool here. As soon as he fully opened his eyes, he saw in front of him our hero who was reading his passport, and said that in front of him was the deputy captain of the special forces. The captain looked around and saw that there were huge pieces of ice near him, and asked who our hero really was. And where did he get a pistol and a flash grenade? The guy said closed that he had recently graduated from school in the gun, if these were stun grenades, he acquired during a trip to the Middle East. The captain immediately asked, is this hero making fun of him? It's cool. To which our hero replied that if they don't believe him, then he can't help it. Our hero asked this captain in a calm tone, has the government already organized rescue centers where citizens can go tomorrow morning? The man looked at our hero in surprise and asked where he got the information about this. The hero immediately thought that everything was the same as last time, but warned the captain that despite the fact that in the early morning the temperature drops significantly, staying under the moonlight for more than 10 minutes can still lead to loss of consciousness and many people will die on the way to rescue point. The captain said that he knew about this but immediately stated that there was no other way out, and despite the fact that they created safe zones, it is very difficult to modify the rescue vehicles and many people can no longer hold on. Therefore, they have no other choice but to let the residents themselves get to rescue stations tomorrow morning. Suddenly, our hero stood up and said that in fact, thick blankets and thick coats can also help lower the temperature, and if they do not fall, this will increase the likelihood of survival. The captain was surprised by such news, and was glad that even more people could survive. Our hero said that they needed to end the conversation here and pointed the gun right at his head. The man immediately asked for one more minute, and asked for a chance to talk about the use of thick blankets before he was killed, so he said that he would just use the walkie-talkie and asked not to worry because he would not call for reinforcements. But instead of shooting this captain, the man took a knife and cut the wire, saying that he was now free. Our hero also said that he respects what the captain is doing, so this time he will not kill him, but will not tolerate any repeated provocations against him. The captain is surprised. He looked at him and asked, isn't he afraid that he won't call for reinforcements so that they deal with him as soon as he leaves? To which our hero replied that he had nothing to fear and asked to look up. The captain looked up and our hero began to explain that this was a surveillance tower with facial recognition cameras and machine guns. And then the captain asked where he got that? Our hero, meanwhile, smiled and said that he brought all this from the Middle East and as soon as the thing is activated, no one except him in this room will call. But in this situation, they probably also don't have time to deal with other people. As soon as the man left, others immediately began to discuss that the soldier had simply left, and only mentioned warm blankets and did not say anything about what happened upstairs. But everyone immediately began to stagger about the fact that his weapon was taken away and that he really lives upstairs, a strong guy, since even a soldier could not cope with him. Mr. Sun, meanwhile, beat sang and said that he did not understand why this man was here because he did not act at all. After that, the fat man began beating everyone else, and the guys thought that they could no longer tolerate this boss. But the man's right hand said that the authorities had already launched a rescue operation. As soon as order was restored, they would still need to use his connections there. Suddenly our hero appeared and asked, saying, is it possible that in times of chaos he still dreams of restoring order? The long-haired man immediately began to run towards our hero and asked who he was. But Sang stopped his worker and ordered him to stand. Sang realized that a guy from the presidential suite lived in front of him and asked, why did he go downstairs? Our hero smiled and said that he was here to make a deal with Boss Gao. At the same time, he took out a bucket and poured several ice cubes onto the table. The long-haired man immediately started shouting that there were ice cubes in front of them, which meant that his room must still be full of other useful things and they could just kill him and take all the things. But our hero immediately came close to this guy and poked him with a machine gun. Sang immediately smiled and asked his friend not to pay attention to such trifles and offered to talk about the deal. Our hero said that they could very well discuss it, but suggested that they try a piece first. Yes, the men immediately put it in their mouths and began to say that it was simply amazing and that they had been here for 3 days. But for the first time they felt so good and could not even imagine what is in this child's room. Suddenly, Mr. Sun appeared, kicked Ken and called him a sneaky bastard who hides ice cubes. He began to trample him with his foot, and says that if next time they don't voluntarily bring all this to him, then the end will come to them. The man immediately began to consume the ice and said that it was simply wonderful. But he also added that they had run out of instant noodles and without the help of rescuers they would probably die of hunger. Suddenly, the man noticed that Duan was sitting in the corner, and was surprised and said that despite the heat, she still refused to take off her clothes and this was quite modest of her. After that, the man said that he likes to play with people like her. He grabbed her hand and said that he was in the mood now, so she would go with him to please him. But the girl immediately pulled back her hand and slapped this fat man in the face, and told him never to touch her again in his life. Mr. Sun was filled with rage and he tore off some of her clothes, saying that she was a dirty creature, and he would do it to her right here and later everyone could taste her body. The girl covered her breasts and the man said that she was already all wet, and she was very hot, and he would now do her a favor and help her take off all these things. Suddenly, Sang appeared behind this gentleman, and said that he had had enough. The gentleman immediately turned around and told him to close his mouth, and asked if he understood who he was talking to. Ken pushed the gentleman and said that Chin is right, and chaos has already arrived. So they might as well die with him. After that, he said with a serious look that from now on this place goes to his command, and everyone else will either go to the rescue center or die here. Our hero, meanwhile, was thinking that his words had finally worked, and since in a past life he was in charge here, if he speeds up the resolution of this issue, then he should have the opportunity earlier. After killing Mr. Sun, Ken drank a bucket of cold water, and said that if they wanted ice water then they should follow him and do whatever he ordered. They immediately started asking him if they weren't going to the rescue point, to which the man replied that it was the end of the world and if they want to survive, they must rely only on themselves, and the rescue point is located a kilometer away, and it is unknown whether they will be able to get there at all alive. The long-haired man looked at the girls and asked why they still felt sorry for these parasites. When they were running out of supplies, Sang said with a smile that our hero planned to use these people, and he thinks that they also need some cannon fodder. So after this, a group of people, exactly at midnight, decided to leave the hotel, wrapped in a blanket with thoughts that they would finally leave this place. The girls discussed that during these 2 days they had almost no supplies left. And when they get to the point, they will definitely eat meat and drink coke. Well, unexpectedly, a long-haired guy approached our hero's ex-girlfriend and said that their older brother gave them ice water to drink and now they want to leave and this is unfair, and in addition, he recalled that the girl said that she was ready to do anything for this. Therefore, she is now obliged to stay with him for some time. The men who were planning to leave thought that since Sang took the supplies since the control he did not give them food or water, but staying in the hotel was like dying of thirst, and going to the rescue point might give them a small chance of survival, but the street is even hotter than they imagined, and even with boards tied to the soles of their shoes, they still feel the warmth emanating from the ground. Suddenly, one of the people tripped over a stone and fell to the ground, hiding, and his body immediately began to melt from the heat. He begged for help. But at a time like this, when you don't know whether you can survive on your own, no one has time to worry about others, even if we are talking about family or loved ones. After all, people during the apocalypse primarily focused on survival. Meanwhile, 2 fat men lay next to each other, under the burning moon, and suddenly one of them opened his eyes, red with anger, and regained consciousness. Meanwhile, our hero looked at all this and thought that in a past life he, like them, went to the rescue point. But then no one reminded him to take a blanket with him, and even though it was only a short kilometer, he knows how many lives were brought to sacrifice. Unexpectedly, 2 corpses were thrown out onto the street, and they broke out the window to get inside. Ken and his group immediately tensed up because they realized that it was a zombie. They began to wonder if they would turn into zombies if they were bitten. The chief took the smallest one by the neck and said that if he was so interested, he could come up and find out himself. After that, he held him by the neck and pressed him to the corpse. The guy immediately fried like a cutlet, and the head of this hotel pulled his hand back, saying that this zombie's body temperature was too high, and he could easily get burned. Suddenly our hero appeared, holding a katana with his back. He politely asked everyone to move away. People looked at him in surprise and did not understand how this guy was going to deal with these monsters. Sang said with a smile that this is a great chance, and he can kill these zombies and then they will kill him. Our hero knew that during the apocalypse, corpses exposed to sunlight will mutate, but they will not become zombies and will not spread the virus, because they are more like the demons of drought described in the classic book of Mountains and Seas, so he also calls them demons of drought. Friends, if you want me to quickly make the second part of the manhwa you like, or you just want to support me, then you can use the super thank you function. I will be glad for any amount, since I spend several weeks creating one manhwa recap, and sometimes even that doesn't pay off. And thank you to those who watched my videos to the end, you are invaluable. After this, our hero rushed to attack one of these monsters, and killed him with one blow, delivering from him a crystalline core that can create a superhuman physique. He immediately took it in his hand with the thought that now the thing belongs only to him. But another demon began to attack him from behind. He jumped up and pushed off with his foot and said that the rest of the people should deal with him. After that, he waved his hands at him and said that they could have a lot of fun, and Gao was angry because Chen abandoned them. With a demonic smile, he picked up one of his assistants and threw him into the hands of this demon. After that, he threw a bottle of water at him so that the younger one could deal with this demon. Our hero, meanwhile, poured himself whiskey into a glass in which a crystalline core lay and reasoned that during the apocalypse, from time to time, similar crystalline cores appear in the skulls of drought demons and mutant animals. And such cores are extremely rare and perhaps no more than 1 in 100, therefore it's real luck that he was able to find him so quickly. He picked up the glass with the crystal, thinking that it must first be thoroughly cleaned and then immediately swallowed. After that, he gulped down a glass of whiskey in which the crystal was floating. His eyes immediately turned red, and his body seemed to tense up. He said out loud that it's just a matter of such a thing. The body can absorb energy from the crystalline core and make the carrier many times stronger. As soon as he swallowed the crystal, his body was filled with demonic energy, and he let out a deafening scream. His muscles enlarged to the point that he even tore his clothes. After that, he fell unconscious on the floor. And on the first floor, meanwhile, the rest of the people were trying to win, the monsters, with the thought that they had spent all their last water on him, and now they had nothing left. The long-haired guy, meanwhile, grabbed the hand of our hero's ex-girlfriend and said that the damned woman was trying to escape and if she moved, he would cut off her legs. The girl immediately began to say that without water they would all die of thirst, and said that she could tell her how, then to cope with Chen if they allow her to go to the rescue point. The man immediately told her to speak faster, and if she tries to deceive then she will be a dead man. The friend immediately started talking about how Jiang is the ex-fiance of our hero, and if she is attacked on the threshold of this guy's house, he will definitely open the door, and then they can ambush him. The long-haired guy smiled and said that he can't believe that this is possible because it's a really good plan. The girl got angry and said that she can cooperate. But she is very hungry, so first they should let her eat them because she really wants meat, to which the long-haired guy replied that the meat in the electric refrigerator has already spoiled and she still wants it. Suddenly Gao approached her, holding a knife in his hand, and said that if she wanted meat, then everything depended on her. The girl looked at her friend and realized that these guys were talking about her cutting off a piece of her. The girl was held by 2 strong guys, and her ex-girlfriend now began to approach her holding a knife. The girl brandished a knife and reminded her friend that she had just offered to use her as bait, and they were actually not friends at all. After that, she began to strike her directly in the stomach, saying that she dare not blame anyone but herself. After that, the girl stood with a crazy smile over the corpse of her friend, and said that she would rise as soon as she had eaten enough, and then drink his blood. Gao looked at all this, and without emotion said that one of the girls should cook the meat because they need to eat well to gain strength and cope with the guy on the top floor, and without water they will not last a day, and if they do not want to turn into a dried-out corpse then they better do as he says. You are within a hair's breadth, and the man immediately began asking where the hellish chef is and asking that she be brought here as quickly as possible. Unexpectedly, our hero woke up and instantly stood up with one jerk, amazed at how strong he had become. He looked at his hands and felt some physical changes, because he felt that his resistance to heat had improved significantly, and also that his muscles and strength had also increased, and he could now break an iron pistol with one blow. After that, he looked at the CCTV cameras and saw Duan standing there right in front of the doorstep of the house. The girl, meanwhile, stood near the door and thought that everyone downstairs had gone crazy, and it was no longer safe there and to be in this room. This was her only hope, and fortunately she still had some trump cards. While she was thinking about this, the door suddenly opened and our hero came out and asked if she was okay. The girl saw that he was completely naked and blushed a little. The guy apologized for this and let her into the room immediately after changing clothes. After that the girl said that she wanted to stay here and he replied that his resources were limited and they had just met so he couldn't take her to his place just because she was pretty, and inside he was thinking that judging by his knowledge from his past life, this woman is a very fun girl, and she had a good relationship with Gao. And he is still thinking about subjugating her right now, but the atmosphere is too awkward. The girl was embarrassed again and looked away, saying that she was not only a chef, but also an outstanding graduate of the Southwestern Medical University with a medical diploma and 3 years of experience as a surgeon. While she was saying this inside, she was thinking that the room was very well equipped, and it's even not in the room, but in the fact that there is ice and electricity here, and she must show her best side to stay here. Our hero, meanwhile, was lying on the sofa and looking at her with the words that the fact that she is a doctor is really very tempting, but there are not enough resources now and it is unknown whether they will be able to live until tomorrow. The girl got scared and began to say that until now he won't kick her out of this building, she will do whatever she wants to him. He immediately smiled and said, if she is ready to do such a thing, then she can feel at home. The girl immediately became embarrassed, and said that she said this without thinking through all the consequences. The guy ignored her with words in his ears and immediately looked her straight in the eyes and said that he must warn her that she must behave decently in front of him and not feel any ulterior motives, because otherwise she will not be in good shape. The girl looked down and said that she understood everything and never doubted the methods and determination of our hero. The man looked again and said that it was great that she understood everything. He was silent for a couple of seconds and told her to undress immediately. The girl looked at him in surprise, because she didn't expect you to be like this, that this guy turns out to be so sexually preoccupied as to get down to business right away. After some time, she was in the shower and thought that there was water here, electricity, and even the ability to take a shower. She did not need to worry about the hot weather and the fact that others could eat her. She washed herself and thought that for those who are from the outside, this place is just a real paradise. But the guy who lives here is not exactly a saint. She remembered how he forced her to kneel with the words that now he would treat her to something else. The girl understood where this was going and immediately opened her mouth and braided it so that he wouldn't throw her out the door. But the man smiled and immediately told her to forget about it. In any case, he thought about it before starting. Meanwhile, in the present, our hero was watching the girl trying to spy on the phone using a CCTV camera and justified himself by saying that he was not doing this just to guess, but simply wanted to prevent her from doing something inappropriate. As soon as the girl took a shower, she put on the clothes that our hero had prepared for her, and went out to him asking if this outfit looked too small for her. Our hero thought a little, and assessed her from all sides and said that this outfit was simply perfect and seemed tailored to her. Suddenly, a sound was heard in his room. It was someone standing outside and knocking on the door, shouting for our hero to quickly open the door and save the girl. Gao stood there, holding our hero's ex in his hands and saying that if he didn't come out now, the door would simply be broken down. The hellish cook immediately looked at our hero and said that they cannot open this door because these people have already eaten one of the girls, and if they open the door, then they also turn out to be victims. Our hero looked her straight in the eyes and asked, have they really already eaten someone? Immediately after this, he began to go out and talk about how they should not rush to break down the door, because if it was damaged, there would be trouble. The men, with crazy red eyes, immediately looked at him as if he were a victim, and his ex continued to shout that wants to be saved. These people no longer looked human, and their red eyes showed that they had mutated. One of them was in ambush and held in his hand to immediately pounce on our hero, and as soon as Chen stepped out of the threshold, the man immediately attacked him. But our hero stopped this attack with one deft movement, and joked with this guy right by the hand, squeezing it until it hurt. After that, using a wrestling technique, he immediately twisted this man and forced him to plunge his own knife into his own neck. Everyone who watched this could not believe their eyes if they did not expect that this guy had such enormous power. Meanwhile, our hero's ex immediately pushed the others aside and began to run towards our hero. She jumped on him, asking him to help her. But our hero immediately realized that the girl was clearly insane, because she was eating a human body. He grabbed her by the neck and looked into her crazy eyes. He briefly explained to her that as soon as people eat a person, their body will mutate, and their mouth will grow, and therefore now they will no longer be considered human. The rest immediately began to say that the end of the world had begun, and it made no difference whether they would eat people to survive or not, because there was no longer any framework of morality. And our hero's ex continued to say that human meat is incredibly tasty, and after eating her body is filled with strength, so she can't wait to taste our hero. Immediately after these words, he sent her with one kick to another part of the corridor, and clicked so that she would no longer dare to approach him. The blow was too strong, and the girl flew out through the window, but at the last moment she managed to catch herself on the edge of the balcony. She began to rise with a crazy look and say that she would never forgive our hero and would definitely eat him. But then it dawned on her that she was exposed to the sun, and it became unbearably hot. The others began to say that it was better for them to attack together with the saint, and immediately attacked our hero with the words that they should not give him a single chance to grab a gun. Our hero, meanwhile, calmly asked them, "Do they really think that he needs to waste ammunition on such weak guys?" One of the fighters immediately jumped up shouting that our hero should not dare to underestimate them because now they are many times stronger. Our hero pulled out a pistol with a smile and said that he liked to trample trash like them into the dirt, and after these words he immediately shot this man right in the head. The rest moved away a little but began to run towards our hero again. Our hero tried to shoot them, but they began to dodge and say that now, they have not only become stronger, but their reaction and speed have also improved, so the bullet is now not so scary for them. Now, the long-haired guy jumped up and said that even if Chin was on guard, he still couldn't attack each of them, and would definitely die. Suddenly, our hero also jumped up and grabbed this guy by the head, asking if he had spoken. The man did not understand what happened and only looked up, and our hero, meanwhile, said that if he had finished speaking, then it was time for him to die, and immediately after that he slammed his head into the floor. After that, a bald man tried to pounce on him and pierce the hero's neck with his blade, but Chin caught his hand and stopped this movement. After that, he tensed up and tore off the man's arm, while simultaneously killing another man who tried to attack him. Gao was the last to attack him, but our hero immediately braided him, easily caught him by the neck, and squeezed him harder. After that, he ran to the wall and hit this thug with all his might, so hard that he even broke it into the wall. When our hero was thinking about the same thing, that he had finally dealt with everyone, he looked up and saw that his ex-girlfriend, who had mutated due to the heat, was flying right above him. The guy looked her straight in the eyes and said that she too quickly turned into something terrible for me, and it seems that her affection is quite deep. Chin was silent for a couple of seconds and, looking straight into her eyes, said that if she did not disappear, he would simply kill her again. The girl ignored his words and screamed at the entire hotel with her deafening demonic scream. Duan, meanwhile, looked at our hero and thought that he was simply amazing because he was able to single-handedly cope with this guy's entire gang. But she also thought that the monster our hero was now looking at gave off a very dangerous feeling. The girl looked down with the thought that she must figure out how to help him, because if she wants to stay on his side, then she simply cannot become a burden for him. The girl looked a little at what was in this room and picked up a whip, telling our hero that she wanted to help him defeat this monster. The guy looked at his companion and said that they were not afraid and not hiding was good, but she would only distract him during the battle. The girl looked down guiltily and asked why he thought so. Meanwhile, our hero's ex had already completely turned into a monster and attacked him. The girl tried to finish him off with one blow, but our hero only silently said that he had already activated his berserker mode. His ex once again tried to pierce his body, but nothing worked, and our hero stood and enjoyed his strength. After that, his ex tried to bite our hero right on the shoulder, but her teeth could not penetrate his skin. He asked with a smile, does she really have fangs just for the battle? But in reality she can't bite through anything, and said that now it's his turn. After that, in one movement he was on top, and already took her into a wrestling move, trying to tear off her locked hands. He relaxed a little and asked is she ready to say goodbye to her limbs? The monster was terrified, and within a second, our hero, using his powers, tore off her hands. The girl screamed again throughout the hotel and our hero jumped away from her, holding the hands of this monster in his hands. After that, he threw them away with the words that he planned that she would suffer greatly during the apocalypse and slowly die from torment, but now he would have to kill her ahead of time. But a second later, he noticed that she immediately stood up and grabbed Gao's body with her tail. After that, she opened her mouth as wide as possible and swallowed this man whole, braiding it without even choking. After that, she looked at our hero, and again screamed behind the wheel with her deafening scream, and meanwhile her arms began to grow at an insane speed. Our hero was surprised that she could regenerate her limbs. Meanwhile, the hellish chef looked at all this and asked how could this even happen in the real world? And our hero, meanwhile, said that it was very cool, because the fact that she cannot die and can regenerate is very exciting, because he will have more time to have fun. He was glad that now he had the opportunity to tear her apart many times. A moment later, he immediately jumped up to her and grabbed her hand, saying that he was very interested in how many times her body looked to recover, so he would start with her hand. So, immediately after these words, he tensed up and tore her hand off in one motion. The monster tried to attack our hero, but he immediately hit her on the back and tore off her second arm. After that, he smiled and continued to open her legs, here they are, and wait until they grow back to tear everything off again. After an hour of this torture, he said that he was disappointed that the girl had stopped recovering, and again thought that they could have a lot more fun. The girl, meanwhile, looked at him with her demonic eyes and asked why he did this. Our hero raised his boot and swung at it to crush her head with the words, "And Thomas is enough, that this is all for the sake of revenge." Hell's chef, meanwhile, stood behind him the whole time, and watched in surprise with all this, and then she asked our hero, "Is Leon okay?" The man immediately turned around and looked and asked straight in the eyes, "Is she ready?" The girl looked at him in surprise and asked what she should be ready for. He approached her from behind, and spread his hands over her body, said that he had just behaved very heroically, and she should be ready to reward him for all this. The girl embarrassedly asked him if he really wanted her to reward him directly here. Meanwhile, the captain whom our hero let go stood on the street with an unknown person and said that the temperature outside seemed to be returning to normal, and perhaps the apocalypse was coming to an end. He also noticed that more and more people began to approach the rescue point, but the girl who stood next to him took a closer look at these people and froze in place. She explained to the captain that these were no longer people, and just a bunch of monsters. The zombies noticed the rescue point and immediately began to run towards it. The captain immediately announced the rapid evacuation of civilians and the rescue point. And not until these monsters were held back. The man began to shoot back and say that he would stop them, and the girl asked that her captain not die today, to which he replied that she should quickly close her mouth and get out of here. Our hero, meanwhile, was lying in bed with the hellish chef, and said that he would allow her to test the power of a berserker. The girl covered herself with a blanket and asked how long this could be repeated, because she couldn't stand it anymore. The guy turned her over on her stomach and said that the intense heat had ended and he needed to go out for a while, and of course he would leave her with unforgettable memories. The girl got scared and asked if she could go with him. Our hero tore off the blanket that covered this girl and proceeded to do what he promised to do with the words that the people who surround him must meet two conditions. Firstly, they must be valuable, and secondly, they must unquestioningly carry out his orders. The girl moaned with pleasure and said she understands everything. After that, he went out into the street and called a truck from his storage with the thought that it looks like Duan has completely repaired him, and he must hurry back before the sea wave rushes in. After that, he got into the car with the thoughts that many zombies from his past life were motionless, and the obsession to reach the rescue point eventually formed a tidal wave attacking the rescue point, and as a result of the zombie attack, many civilians and soldiers died, and this incident also led, moreover, a large number of military weapons were scattered. And this is exactly how various groups of people were formed who could live and fought for territory. Such people have already appeared in this world, and when they saw that our hero was driving a car, they immediately pointed their weapons at him and ordered him to stop the car. Jin just smiled and realized that they were real fools in front of him because they dared to order to stop the car and rob it at the same time. After that, he pressed the gas pedal and knocked down all these three. When he reached his destination, he noticed that, just like in his previous life, the walls were cracked from the sun, and combined with the onslaught of a wave of zombies, this ultimately led to the collapse of the subway station, and the number of people dying underground was likely in the thousands. He looked down at the subway, and saw that all the zombies below were attracted by three cars, and he also thought that, unfortunately, not all zombies have crystals in their heads and it would take too much time to open each skull in turn. After that, he got into the car again and headed to another place with the thought that first he needed to see how things were going in college. After all, if you think about it, this is his first return to the engineering university after graduation. As soon as he got to the place he planned to go, he immediately got out of the car and sent it back to his storage room. After that, he went inside and saw that there were several people sitting on the sofa and holding monsters in chains. They began to tell our hero that he was entering someone else's territory, so he better hand over his things. Our hero smiled and said that he just needed to go somewhere, and they could help him, and in return he could give them stewed chicken legs. As soon as people heard this, they immediately began to rejoice and say that he had chicken legs, and this is worth a lot in such a difficult time. they immediately started telling him to throw them to them and hurry up. Our hero smiled and threw one chicken leg, and 3 people immediately began to fight for it, and talk and argue about who was going to get it. But in the meantime, our hero showed them that the chicken leg was on a thread, and smiled and said that these guys are not worthy of eating these chicken legs, after which he pulled the thread and the chicken leg was in his hand again. And the man immediately became enraged and took up his weapon, saying that no one dares to humiliate them like that. And our hero looked at them with his emotionless gaze, and immediately raised his gun. He fired 3 bullets, hitting everyone in the head, after which he began to rise with the words that he did not remember that there were so many idiots in a previous life, and maybe it was his advice that helped more people survive, which led to such situations. After that, he went up to the desired floor and began his journey towards the laboratory in the reptile department. He saw that there was a lock hanging on it, and immediately broke it with the words that it looked like no one had entered this laboratory for a long time. As soon as he was inside, he immediately realized that many snakes had already died, and the air was filled with the smell of decomposition. But suddenly he stopped near one of the shelves and noticed that one snake, with horns on its head, was still alive and absorbing another snake. Our hero was happy because it was the future leader of the army of water rattlesnakes, because it is a golden king snake. Looking at this situation, our hero understood how the snake managed to survive, because it simply ate its fellows, and in his past life this snake was one of the first to undergo mutations, and it ate a lot of people and almost swallowed him. The guy looked into his eyes and thought that in a week when the flood starts, this snake will begin to mutate, and he doesn't know how much it will change by then, and it will be very bad if he can't defeat it. He also looked at her and thought that the snake looked too smart, and she emanated intelligence, as if she was able to find it. The snake suddenly turned its head in the other direction, and our hero also looked at the wall, noticing some extraneous noise, as if there was someone behind the wall. These were armed people who started shouting to our hero to get out quickly. After all, they know for sure that he is hiding there? Chen replied in a slightly irritated voice that now is a critical moment, and he cannot allow any guys to bother him. He was about to go out to deal with all these men, but suddenly a girl appeared who was able, with acrobatic movements, to disarm each of them and wring their necks. As soon as it ended last, she realized that a gun was poking at the back of her head. It was Chin who praised the girl for her good movements. The girl was silent for a couple of seconds, and in one deft movement, she threw the pistol away from her head, and somersaulted at Chin. She squeezed his face with her legs, and grabbed his head to twist his neck, but I still noticed that she couldn't turn anything. A couple of minutes later, the girl was already tied up and sitting on a chair, and did not understand what was happening here, and meanwhile our hero asked what was happening here. The girl looked into our hero's eyes and said that her name is Bai Kong, and she is the captain of a special operations unit called the Azure Tiger, and she advises him to behave decently and let her go. Our hero looked at the girl and the link and asked if she knew anyone named Lu from the Special Forces squad. The girl looked at this guy in surprise and asked, "Do they already know him?" Our hero smiled and remembered how he attacked this man, but said, "You think that you once saved the life of this captain?" The girl was surprised, and under torture agreed to tell everything she knew. She said that a group of fugitives seized the school and used the students as hostages and stole their weapons, and when the zombie horde attacked the rescue point, the captain led the civilians to leave first, but he did not expect that some escaped prisoners infiltrated the ranks of ordinary civilians. Our hero, meanwhile, was enjoying a steak, and listened to what the girl was saying that in any case, it was not her fault, and she replied that as long as they have weapons in their hands, these people have nothing to fear, but now they don't. The girl was tired, rested. How long was our hero going to keep her tied up? And asked to untie her as soon as possible. Chin said that he would untie her only if she promised him not to squeeze his head with her legs as she did before, and the girl said that she agreed to this. But in return he wants steak. Our hero smiled and tried to untie her, but suddenly noticed that he seemed to have overdone it knots, and it is difficult for him to untie it. After he finally managed to untie her, he said that he had his own business so he couldn't help much, but he could provide some fire support. And with these words he handed the girl a couple of machine guns and told her to hurry up and left because he doesn't want to be bothered. The girl took the machine gun in her hands and said that she was planning to secretly attack their fortress, because only by returning the looted supplies would the people locked in the school be able to survive. So perhaps this is their first and last meeting. As soon as our hero heard about the supplies, he smiled and began to say that the Special Forces captain was his brother, so he decided to help this girl. Meanwhile, the former prisoners were sitting in the administrative block, discussing how their robbery went. Ordinary people. His subordinate was talking about how all the guys were outside now, and this time they were definitely going to deal with those students in the dorm. The man said that this was good news and stated that those who had not previously shown readiness for battle should go to the front, and if anyone was destined to die, it should be them. While he was saying this, our hero knocked down the door to this room and apologized for interrupting their meeting. People immediately started asking him how he managed to get in here, because there were more than 20 people standing guard outside. Our hero smiled at this and said that he could easily explain how he got here. He raised his finger up and said that he would now shoot this man. As soon as he raised his finger, the head of this guy who was talking about something immediately shattered into pieces. Everyone looked at it in surprise and did not understand how it happened and what exactly happened here. After that, our hero looked at them seriously and said that if they move, they will also die like this guy. The girl on the roof, meanwhile, was sitting with a sniper rifle and said that the first target had been eliminated, but there were still a lot of thugs there. So our hero is now in a very dangerous situation, and she is still confident that his plan to lure the enemy alone is too risky. The girl closed her eyes for a second, thinking that she couldn't believe that she agreed to such an absurd plan. Suddenly, she looked through the scope and saw that he was walking into the room. Suddenly closed, she immediately used her earpiece to ask what was going on there. Through the headphones she heard such that people realized that there were snipers sitting outside, and they began to say that this little brat might not think that he could do whatever he wanted here since he had such support. The woman immediately began to run along the roof with the thought that, as she thought, she was easily noticed. She screamed through the earpiece so that our hero would find a way to stall for time, and she would soon come and save him. The girl ran at full speed for several minutes to save this guy, and as soon as she was inside, she flew into the room, with a mad scream, said that she was here to avenge her friend, and raised her rifle ready to shoot. But all she saw was this guy standing alone in the middle of the room and holding the leader by the throat, saying that his sniper was late, and he also added that there were no supplies here. Returning home, our hero recalled that the leader said that he could not be killed because the people behind him would not allow our hero to leave with impunity. Immediately after these words of the main one, our hero broke his neck, with the words that he should not worry, because his main one would soon join him in the grave. The sniper stood and looked at all this with a surprised expression on her face, and asked our hero if he could do all this alone, to which he replied that he just worked out regularly and besides, there were no more supplies here and they were probably already hungry. Girl immediately began to talk about the fact that someone else could have raided them and now that everything necessary was over, the students would have to die. Our hero, meanwhile, thought inside that if necessary, he would share with them some of what he had just collected, but of course it depends on how they behave. He didn't answer anything or briefly stated, "Do you think they need to go to the women's dormitory?" The girl looked at him in surprise and asked what they would do there. Our hero looked at the sniper and told her not to worry, because he asked the dead man where the students had gathered and they answered that they were all in the women's dormitory. Meanwhile, in another place in this building, one of the people was lowering to the ground a girl who was covered in scars. After that, an unknown man approached her and asked if his sister had found the feeling she was looking for, because she had been hanging here for several days, pretending that she was a prisoner. The girl did not answer and the man took out a whip and began to whip her on the back. After that, with a smile under his mask, he asked how she was feeling now, but the girl did not answer anything and only asked for more. After a couple of minutes of beating, the girl with a smile said that she felt much better this way. After that, the man sat down on a chair and sat the girl on his leg, asking her if she saw who took all their supplies. The girl with a satisfied face replied that it was the devil himself. But the man did not let up and said that she should say his name, and he would make him pay for all this. The woman looked into his eyes and the cow replied that the guy's name was Suchun. Meanwhile, our hero delivered the sniper to her fighters, and the captain looked at our hero in surprise and asked what he was doing here, to which the sniper replied that this man said that he knew the captain. Our hero did not greet the captain and immediately said that his wound looked quite serious, so he wanted to look at it to see if he could help with anything. The Special Forces captain immediately began to take off the bandages and say that it was just a scratch, but for some reason, it was getting worse and worse, to which our hero replied that cannibals are those creatures that eat people and their nails are full of bacteria and viruses. This can be life-threatening. The captain sadly said that now the medicine is a rarity that cannot be found, but he does not want to die like this and is not going to put up with it. Unexpectedly, our hero took out a pack of medicines from his pocket and said that this should be enough. Everyone immediately, and a famous university boxer who loved to create noise about gender inequality. After that, the girl looked at our hero and asked if he had any food in his bag. She immediately extended her hand to pick up his bag and see what was inside, but our hero slapped her in the face and told her not to interfere with him. The others immediately began to support our hero and said that it was high time to slap her in the face, because she is causing a lot of trouble here, because she single-handedly took over the whole hostel and they have long been fed up with her, and this is all wrong, that she has such privileges only because she has some stinking money. Our hero dried it all off and looked at the girl and said that it looks like she has a bad reputation here. After that, the girls started screaming that they don't dare treat her like that, and she will find your father, and they will be ordered to kill them all. The sniper watched the girl leave and asked if all this was normal. Our hero replied that she was going to find her father, and is no one going to stop her? The girl left and thought that all the men in this country are inferior to her, and especially our hero, because he is no match for the noble men from abroad. She was unexpectedly grabbed from behind. It was a man with gray hair who asked her where is our hero. After our hero finished all his business in this hostel, he thought that now the most important goal for him is to wait for the king snake to mutate and then catch it, because he wonders whether by then he will be able to gain the ability to hydrokinesis. As soon as he moved far enough, he saw that the girl, who was his former classmate, was now hanging on a rope and begging for help. He asked with a smile did she find her father so quickly, and the gray-haired man who stood on the truck and said that he steal Fong from the Federal Bureau of Evolution. After that, the man said that our hero dared to steal their supplies and he mistook him for a person who has unique abilities. Our hero looked at this guy and asked if he really was from the Federal Bureau of Evolution, to which the man said that it was and stated that for this meeting he had even prepared a gift for our hero. As soon as he knocked on the truck, the doors opened, and our hero saw that there was a crowd of zombies standing there. Meanwhile, the man looked at Chen and asked him if he was ready to die. Inside the hostel, we heard the screams of monsters from the direction our hero went. The girl immediately started talking about how she would go and check, and the Special Forces captain would stay here and protect everyone. To which he briefly replied that he was not going to stay here and would go along with his partner. Meanwhile, the gray-haired man looked at our hero and said that now his classmate is dying, and he has a great chance to be a hero and save this beauty, and if he kneels and begs, then they will immediately let her go. Our hero thought a little and said that in fact it was not so impossible to save this girl. The girl immediately began to say that she was very glad that he was so ready and asked him to hurry up and get on his knees so that they would let her go. Our hero stopped a little and said that he had one problem. The girl could not believe her ears and said that he had just said that he would save her, and he must fulfill his promise like a real man. The guy replied that of course he is a real man, but he is not worthy to be her savior and offered her an option where he would help her contact those foreign gentlemen she was talking about, and find out if they would want to save her? The girl said that now she absolutely understands why he was watching her, and says that these are all trifles, and the fact that she called him inferior is a stupid reason for revenge. The girl started screaming and said that if our hero thinks that she will beg and apologize to be saved, then he is mistaken because she absolutely does not need to be saved by a person like him. After that, the guy smiled and said that he hoped that over time she would remember her words and repeat them from the beginning. Then he pointed his finger down and the girl lowered her eyes, noticing that monsters who wanted to bite her began to approach her feet. The girl immediately screamed that she was wrong and began to beg our hero to save her, and the gray-haired man, meanwhile, laughed, and was surprised that our hero is really the person who will not help in a difficult situation, but he immediately said that there is nothing wrong with that, because in any case, our hero will soon join his classmate in the grave. Also Fedor the man said, you think that now you will show him the technology of their Federal Bureau of Evolution. He took out a jar and said that if you apply this powder to yourself, then these monsters will immediately obey you. Chin said that sprinkling ashes on yourself is a good idea because it makes these monsters think that the guy they see is one of them. After that, the man smiled and ordered all the other monsters to kill this hero. But Chin immediately took out his blades from a hidden space and cut all these monsters into pieces. The gray-haired man looked at all this and declared that if he wanted to play with someone important before dying, then he would gladly perform in this way. But suddenly he noticed that the guy was standing right in front of him, and was able to pass through all the monsters. Meanwhile, the Special Forces captain and his assistant approached, thinking that they were late because their friend was already surrounded. The man, meanwhile, looked at the monsters and asked them why they don't attack but just stand idle in front of their enemy. Our hero looked at this man and told him not to assert himself by shouting because it was pointless. The man's gaze changed and he asked our hero what he meant, to which the guy smiled. After that, he spoke better back and stated that a couple of seconds were enough for him to kill all these monsters. The man couldn't believe his eyes and asked how this was even possible. After that, he jumped up behind Fifth and grabbed this guy by the head, by his iron mask. When with the words that he never wanted to have anything to do with the Federal Bureau of Evolution, and asked who ordered to find and kill him, because if the answer was, he can save this guy's life. Our hero's hands began to clench, stronger and stronger, and the man looked up and asked what Chin was up to and begged him to stop for a while. But our hero was unshakable, and after just a couple of seconds he tore off this idiot's head. The Azure Tiger looked at it all so cool and couldn't believe her eyes. No problems were solved in an instant, just like some time ago, and definitely not something that could only be achieved through training. Which means that this guy has some, then by strange forces. As soon as our hero stood up, he said that when dealing with such a trifle, he must restrain himself a little, and now he dreams of having a capable assistant. Meanwhile, Dawn was sleeping and again had a dream that she was in bed with Chen. She woke up with moans of pleasure. After that, she caught her breath a little and couldn't understand why she was dreaming about this guy again, and why he still hadn't returned to her. She remembered his words that if she became useless, then she would not have the necessary qualities to stay next to him, and the girl thought that she would in no way become a burden for him, and would do whatever he asked. With these thoughts, she took the gun and said that she wanted to be his right hand. She opened the door of the room because she heard a strange scream, but did not see anyone in this place, and was surprised because she clearly understood that the voice was coming from here. But as soon as she turned around, she saw that standing in front of her was a huge monster that appeared as if out of nowhere. The girl looked at him slowly approaching and did not understand when he managed to appear right behind her. She looked around and saw that the path of retreat was blocked by the table, and she had nowhere to run. The girl immediately dropped the gun and noticed that this monster was actually blind and he was guided only by smell. She thought that she was a little lucky and pressed herself against the table to move away from him. But he began to lean, and now she was thinking that this guy too close, and if she makes even one sound, they will immediately attack her. She began to reach for the gun, thinking that if she could reach it, she would have a chance. But suddenly she ran her hand too hard on the table and made a rustling sound, and the monster immediately realized that his heart was right in front of him. The girl remembered the words of our hero that his resources are limited, therefore, he cannot keep her just because she is pretty, and she also remembered his words that if she finds the crystal core in the monster's head, she will receive new abilities and he will not allow useless people to surround herself with. When she remembered all this, she immediately got out of the situation and struck straight at the place where this monster should have had an eye. Immediately after this blow, the monster grabbed her with his hand, right by the leg. Meanwhile, the girl did not let up and continued to strike him right on the head with her heel. She noticed an axe near her and thought that it was a pity that our hero didn't see this, because then he would understand that she was not useless. After that, she approached the monster who was holding on to the sore spot, and said that now she would see if there was a crystal core in his head. Meanwhile, at the engineering university, Bai Kong and Lu followed the advice of our hero and began to organize the evacuation of students due to an imminent flood, and the girl even contacted her brother, asking him to bring troops here to join them and ensure the safety of the students, and the snake on which the hero received special attention, and meanwhile she began to mutate. Meanwhile, He was also in the hostel and said that he would now find out how quickly the snake mutates, after which he took a large bucket of water and dipped the snake in it. The guy saw that the snake was obediently going into the water behind Fifth, and realized that she knew that she needed to get into the water to complete her mutation. He said with a smile that by doing so she would save him from a lot of trouble. As soon as the snake plunged into the water behind Fifth, its body immediately changed and increased in size, so much so that the bucket collapsed. And after a couple of moments, in front of our hero there was a huge snake. He thought about what powerful growth is at the initial stage of mutation. It's simply incredible, and was glad that he gave the snake just a bucket of water, because if he had waited for the flood, it would have been a real disaster. He then summoned his katana and stated that now that the snake had decided to submit to him, he might consider keeping it as a pet. But immediately after these words, the snake saw the window and tried to escape. Our hero said with a smile that if she wanted to escape, it meant that she had clearly gained more brains. He immediately jumped out right behind her and swung his blade to pierce her skull, but instead only broke his katana. He looked in surprise at his broken blade and was surprised that this snake had incredibly thick skin. He looked her straight in the eyes and told her not to relax, because if the blade did not work, he would simply beat her to death with his fists. After this, the snake grabbed him with its tail, and our hero declared that it was a very smart move to lure him into a trap. But he also added that the attack was just a deception maneuver, and now the snake will say goodbye to its life. Meanwhile, Brother Bai asked his sister why she was so sad. Can't she really come to terms with parting with this handsome Suchin? His sister just clicked displeasedly and told him to keep quiet. The man said that he was surprised that she liked this guy and asked whether he would not be doomed if he stayed here, to which the girl immediately replied that this guy would never die. The girl began to talk about how when she first saw him, she felt that he was incredibly strong. And this deep gaze, which is full of secrets, is completely incomprehensible to her, and he looks to her like a real monster, so they will definitely meet again. At the same time, our hero began a fierce fight with a huge snake that had just mutated. He looked into her eyes and said that he had heard that snakes have very highly developed nerves, and even if their heads are cut off, they will still be able to bite. Immediately after these words, he said that he had a better plan, and lowered the snake's head on the floor, then grabbed its upper part and tore it into two parts, exactly lengthwise. After that, he began to delve into her brains and rejoiced that he had finally found the crystal he needed. He looked at it, and thought with joy that now he would find out what abilities this crystal would give him. The extreme heat deprived people of their will, and the flood that swept the whole world completely destroyed human civilization, and even cities far from the coast could not avoid destruction due to the flood. And due to the low relief of the engineering university, only tall buildings such as the administrative building remained above the water. Meanwhile, our hero, who had absorbed the crystalline core of the golden king snake, is now underwater. Inside he was thinking that what was expected, absorbing the crystalline core of the golden king snake had given him new abilities and his body had undergone further changes. After all, after contact with water, not only tiny scales appear on his body, but also his eyes have become more sensitive to light, as if a protective film has formed in front of them, and he does not even need to use his mouth or nose to breathe. But at the same time he does not feel suffocation and such a sensation that he breathes through his skin. He was thinking that this wasn't really what he wanted, because he wanted to manipulate water, but instead he got the ability to breathe underwater, and this is actually quite a useful skill considering that the whole world is underwater. As soon as he surfaced, he began to talk out loud about how it looked like the volcanic eruption had reached its peak since their city was far from the volcano. They still looked relatively clear, but when a huge amount of volcanic ash filled the air, covering it all, doomsday will not be far off. But he immediately began to think that in the face of these apocalyptic events, human civilization is just fluff, and in order not to become a victim, he needs to strengthen his strength, because in his past life after the Great Flood this city witnessed the emergence of several powerful groups. The unchangeable area, forming a water area in the northern part of the city, was occupied by the army of the Golden Snake King and the Female Corpse King, and the southern part of the city. It became a gathering place for the cannibal tribe of the Clan of Eaters. The western part of the city was under the control of the Rat King and his army of rats. and the eastern part of the city was occupied by Skull Crusher Gao and Duanya from the Green City Hotel, and in his past life, our hero almost died at their hands several times. But in this life, he has already dealt with unnecessary people, and the Golden King's snake ahead of time, and in order to remain strong, there is only one way, and that is to mine the remaining crystal cores. After that, he got out of the water and began to think that the clan of Devourers has a large population and numerous factions, and the woman king of corpses is elusive, so finding her now is almost impossible. After that, he remembered that in his previous life, the University of Technology experienced a rat epidemic, and the Rat King should definitely be there, and if he found him in advance, he could obtain his crystalline core with minimal effort. Suddenly the guy noticed that they began to surround him and decided that he had relaxed too much, since he allowed them to surround him. Meanwhile, some surviving people tried to figure it out as high as possible, and did not understand how such a rapid flood happened. One of the men was hanging on a pole and told his friend that someone was swimming towards them, and the second friend told his brother to stop making noise because now anyone who is in the water is as good as dead. Well, suddenly they saw our hero and were surprised that this guy really managed not to drown during the flood. The men thought that if the Bureau had not sent them to follow this guy, they would not have been stuck in this flood, and decided that if this guy decided to come right here, they would kick him straight into the water. One of the men said that this guy was moving too fast, and it looked like something was following him. They suddenly saw a bunch of drowned people and could not believe what kind of creatures they were in the water. And they also didn't understand why our hero swims so fast even against the current. They noticed that Chun was swimming straight towards them and began to say that they were important people from the Federal Bureau of Evolution, and warned him not to come closer because otherwise they would kill him. Chun was surprised that in this life the influence of this bureau had spread so far and so quickly, but he still said that this was great news because he could get some information about the situation. After that, he jumped out of the water, straight towards these two unknown people. He hit one of them in the head with his boot, forcing him to let go of the table. The man began to fall, but his friend immediately regained his bearings and was able to catch his friend by the hand. The fat man said that he could not grab the column, and the guy who was holding him said that his friend should not be afraid, because they both would definitely return alive. The fat man realized his situation and told his friend to let him go and not hold such a heavy load, because if he continues like this, they will both die. But his friend immediately started screaming that he will never let his brother go. If they die, then they will die. Meanwhile, our hero looked down on them and asked them to tell them everything they knew about the Federal Bureau of Evolution. The men began to talk about how they never tell anything in life, and even if they are killed, there will be others who will avenge them, so they are not afraid to die. Our hero smiled and said that these two had courage, but immediately asked not to blame him for throwing them straight to these monsters. Finally, the fat man got tired of holding on, and his hand let go of its own accord and he fell straight into a cluster of monsters. His friend, seeing this, immediately rushed back, already trying to get his fat friend to help him, but he immediately saw monsters in front of him and realized that he was going to die. But as soon as he thought about it, our hero jumped down and took out his katana, cutting this monster into several pieces. After that, he jumped on everyone else and dealt with everyone with a couple of deft movements. Everyone who looked at it could not believe their eyes, because this guy was incredibly strong. He was impregnated and did not even look like a person when he moved like that. When the men got out, they said that they are now indebted to our hero, so they tell everything they know. They started talking about the fact that the Federal Bureau of Evolution sent them here to keep an eye on our hero, and it is now located at the University of Science and Technology, and is headed by Liu and the group researchers, and they simply do what they are told. Whatever orders come from above, members of the Federal Bureau are obliged to carry them out. Chin thought about the fact that last time the rat disaster also happened at the University of Science and Technology, and it seems that there is a connection between the rat disaster and this Federal Bureau of Evolution. He looked at these men and asked, "Is there research being done on rats there?" The men immediately replied that only researchers are allowed inside the laboratory, so they know little about what is happening inside and cannot say anything for sure. Chin immediately decided in his head that no matter what, he had to go there and investigate the situation before the catastrophe with the rats happened. Meanwhile, Duanya, who was still in the Green City Hotel, fortunately removed the crystal core from the zombie's head. The girl was happy that everything worked out for her, but suddenly she noticed that the water had already reached the top floor. As soon as she swallowed the crystal, her body began to change. But suddenly a strange creature crawled out of the water and enveloped Duan's body. The girl looked at it all and said that it all felt very slippery and disgusting. Meanwhile, the monsters tried to attack the girl, but she was able to grab him with her own hands. Well, as soon as she did this, the monster used the remaining tentacles and twisted her body, putting her in an uncomfortable position, while the girl screamed that she was completely confused and could not move at all. And there are countless of these monsters right in front of her. The girl looked at all this and was indignant because she didn't even have time to get used to her abilities, and she was already in mortal danger. She remembered our hero's words that if she finds and uses the crystal core, she will be able to gain the ability of a monster. But many monsters look normal, and by their appearance it is impossible to determine what ability the crystal core has. The girl looked at our hero and asked him what he was talking about, because how can she recognize her abilities if she doesn't even know them? The guy answered with a smile that she should feel it, she should feel her whole body, feel the environment, and feel every change. It's like trying to master it, and control it, and then she will succeed. Unexpectedly, Dawn laughed and said that now she feels everything perfectly, and said that she sees the small brains of these monsters. After that, her eyes flashed red and she ordered them all to stop. The monsters immediately obeyed and retreated from the girl, and she only said that she was very annoyed by the fact that she was now all sticky. After that, the girl raised an axe and declared that now she was going to cut them all into pieces like cheese. A couple of minutes later, when it finally ended, she noticed that she was all dirty and she needed to quickly go take a shower. Suddenly, behind her, she heard someone's voice asking if she could join her in the shower. The girl immediately turned around and angrily asked who was behind her. It was our hero, who was all wet, and said that the girl was coping well because she even thought about grabbing a weapon for protection. The girl immediately rushed to hug him and say that she was very worried and had been waiting for him for a very long time, so she was very glad that he returned safe. Suddenly she blushed and asked what was resting on her groin. After that, she looked at our hero again and realized that he was naked again, after which she immediately walked away from him and asked why he wasn't wearing it again, which he replied that the water was too dirty. So he took off all his clothes and went to take a shower. A couple of minutes later, our hero was already in the shower, and said that only when you go outside do you realize that home is still best. After the shower, they climbed into the shared bathroom, and washed themselves together. And then, already trying, the girl began to give him a massage, and our hero was curiously interested in whether his companion had awakened or some kind of ability, and the girl asked, "Did he really see that I was trying, that she had already eaten the crystals?" To which he replied that he didn't know anything, I saw and only felt it from the temperature of her mouth. The girl immediately blushed and asked how he could tell by the temperature in her mouth. Our hero asked her not to bother herself with all sorts of thoughts and asked what ability she had now, to which she replied that it looked like it was something like the ability to control consciousness. Our hero immediately asked if this ability could be used to control people. The girl replied that she didn't know and suggested that we first try to test this ability on our hero. She tried to take control of his consciousness, but immediately noticed that an incredible aura emanated from him, and the power of his mind was simply beyond limits. The girl looked at him for a couple of seconds and realized that if he had not asked her to stop, she would have lost consciousness the moment she tried to influence him. Meanwhile, our hero smiled and said that he could see her ability perfectly, and she was pretty good, so now he would force her to practice until her legs gave way. The next morning, they began to shoot monsters, and our hero taught her to focus her mind in order to control him with her thoughts and then set a goal for herself, and finally pull the trigger. The girl listened to all this and asked the hero if he didn't want heading to the University of Technology, and why he still has time to teach someone how to shoot. After these words, our hero began to leave and say that he was giving the girl half a day so that she could become familiar with her abilities and shooting skills. And he also stated that you are trying, that when time runs out, the girl will go with him, and he will finally have a chance to show his usefulness. A couple of hours later, they finally headed to the technological university, and the girl asked our hero if it was normal for her to go out into the street like this. To which he replied that everything was fine, and even if she didn't wear anything, no one would still be able to do anything to her. After this, the girl at the helm asked the hero whether he had already been to a scientific and technical university. Chen looked at his glass of wine and said that he had already been, because he came to visit a friend. Now he wondered if his friend was still alive. His companion smiled and told our hero not to worry because good people are always lucky, no matter where they go. After a couple of minutes, the girls said that they had finally arrived at the scientific and technical university. They immediately opened fire on them, and only then they asked who had arrived here and what they were doing here. Our hero looked at this guard and realized that this was a scientific and technical university where the mutant rat king had risen last time. Chen stood on the bow of the boat and said that they were here to join the Federal Bureau of Evolution and asked to open the gate. The guard, meanwhile, looked at his companion and said, "Do you think that he is very glad that the man understands everything and also brought the rabbit girl here?" He immediately looked at her again and asked her to get up and spend the night with him, and then he will allow them both to enter. But no, the girl took out the stewed pork and said that if the guard opened the doors, she would let him through. The man immediately went crazy from what he saw and said that it was closed, that this was all changing, and they both could enter, after which he looked at his assistant and ordered him to open the gate as quickly as possible. After that, they opened the gate, and the boat drove in, and the guard immediately began to demand that they park the boat at the side of the road and give him his stewed pork. The guard with crazy eyes said that it smelled incredibly delicious and for the sake of this stewed pork he would let them go for now, and they sent the batch to the laboratory a little later. He ate a rotten drop that the girl changed in his mind and made him think that it was stew. As soon as he filled the rings, he said that he would show the way to our heroes. Next to them walked another little boy, who said that since from now on they will all live on the base, it would be right if they help each other. He began to explain that the lower level is for the elderly, children and other scum, and he will take them upstairs where they will find a clean room. Savvy said this, some little boy crashed into him. The man immediately got angry with him and asked what was wrong with this guy. Can't he walk normally? To which the boy replied that he was just a little dizzy. After that he apologized and said that this won't happen again. Our hero's companion immediately took this boy in her arms and noticed that in fact it was a girl who had her hair cut too short. Some girl also noticed that the girl was too weak from her voice, and after that she asked the girl where her parents were, to which the little girl replied that they went in search and you still haven't returned. Duan took something out of her pocket and said that she had a piece of bread left, and offered it to the girl. The little girl looked at her savior and asked her if she would be hungry if this bread was taken away from her. Suddenly our hero got into the conversation and said that his companion would never go hungry. The girl looked at this guy and said that he was a liar because at this time everyone was starving. Our hero took this too personally, and immediately called from the other side a table with food, saying that she can doubt his character but cannot doubt his strength, because as long as his woman is nearby, she will never remain hungry. Unexpectedly, everyone immediately began to fuss and ask our hero where he got the stew, and the girl, seeing the table with this food, said that for the sake of meat she also wants to be our hero's woman. Duan immediately began to get jealous and forcefully push food into this girl's mouth, telling her not to say anything stupid because she was a child. Suddenly, people started coming and calling everyone scum because, in this place, there are rules that hoarding food is wrong and all materials must be previewed and then exchanged for points. Also, their leader said that he remembers that in the past few days, no one exchanged food, so it's surprising where the food came from here. The girl who was eating the bread immediately began to cry, and our hero's companion tried to console her and tell her not to be afraid. After all, they are just making sure that these people say everything correctly. After that, our hero's companion said that everyone who works here works all the time for food, and they finally deserve a good dinner, so they can enjoy what she has to offer them, and at the same time with these words, the girl used her ability to get into their mind. They began to devour food and say that our hero's companion was a very intelligent girl and that out of gratitude they could punish her tonight. But then they began to look at our hero and say that this newcomer had broken the rules and should be punished even more. The guards began to talk about how the punishment was a duel for life and death with two monsters. The hero looked at these people and then remembered, because these were the same brothers who were on the pillar during the flood and whom he saved from the drownings. The little girl immediately recognized her former friends and began screaming that something was wrong with them. The The guards, meanwhile, were eating meat and talking about how these two failed the task and could not score points, so they were sentenced to death. But killing them right away was a waste of time and they could not allow it, so they kept them with them so that have a little fun. And most importantly, the guard continued to eat meat and talk about how he didn't expect that our hero knew these two, and now everything is getting even more interesting, so he decided to raise the bet and said that if our hero loses this one, they will throw the little girl into the water, along with her brothers to feed the water monsters. Our hero began to look at the two brothers and think that they were in some kind of crazy state, and perhaps they were injected with drugs so that they did not understand what was happening. And in the meantime the main guard ordered everyone to start a fight. The rest of the guards immediately released these two brothers from their chains and these two madmen attacked our hero. But for Chen it was not a problem to deal with his own at the same time, and he killed them with just a couple of blows. The main guard looked at all this and was surprised that these two brothers were blown away so quickly because he spent 2 whole doses of his medicine on them. Then he looked at our hero and said that the guy could forget about it because in any case it was only 2 useless junk. Then the guard said that he was in a good mood today. Therefore, if our hero gives him all his supplies, he will pretend that nothing happened and turn a blind eye to all this. Chen looked straight into the eyes of this guard and asked him why everyone should give him their supplies. The rest of the guards began to laugh and say that if this guy is asking such questions, who does it mean that it's just recently here? After all, anyone who enters the Science and Technology University must follow Boss Lu's rules to maintain order and weed out those who are useless. After all, they don't support garbage, and if someone wants to stay here, then they need to earn points for their contribution. And they can only earn them if they transfer their resources or find powder. Our hero thought about these points for contribution and realized that obviously, this was beneficial only to those who set these rules. He was silent for a while and said that the guards had already eaten everything he had and he had nothing else. Suddenly a very fat guard appeared and said that if anyone needed points for their contribution, they could work for him. The rest of the guards immediately greeted their captain. A huge fat man was accompanied by 2 slaves who dragged him, and said that free food and accommodation are advantages of their technological university. He also added that there are highly paid positions available here. After these words, the security captain killed one of his subordinates, and stated that now they do not have enough people and they are just in time to replace the man who had just been killed. Then he turned his gaze to the bunny girl and said that he would give her every can of cold cuts a day and an unlimited amount of instant noodles if she were to be his concubine. After that, the security captain took one of the women by the head and said that now is the apocalypse and therefore industrial production has stopped, so he makes great sacrifices for the sake of his girls. Then he looked into the eyes of his concubine and said that he was very quickly bored with these guys. The guards immediately began to say that their boss had made a very generous offer for our heroes, so they should accept it, because this way the boss would have a new woman, and he would allow them to have fun with the previous ones. Suddenly the fat man fell silent, and ordered everyone to shut up too. He began to sniff and talk about feeling a strange smell. After that he looked at everyone who was here and asked what they ate here. The guards immediately lost face because they completely forgot about what they had. Meat without the boss's permission is a death sentence. The guards immediately fell to their knees and began to apologize and say that they had not thought, and begged him to give them another chance because in the future they would always bring him food first. The security captain looked at them like idiots, and said that it really stinks here. After that he asked them if they had eaten enough crap, and advised them to shut their mouths and go wash them out. Meanwhile, our hero was surprised that this security boss could see through the mental control of his companion. The guards tried to tell their boss that they had, in fact, eaten meat, but suddenly they all felt sick to their stomachs and rushed to the toilet to relieve themselves. Meanwhile, the security captain could not understand how he got into such a company of fools, and said that one day he would get rid of all these idiots, and would be left alone. Meanwhile, he looked at the captain and thought that he was very strange, because our hero does not feel any peculiarities in this guy, but a very powerful aura still emanates from him, and under his influence, everyone came out of the mental control of his companion, after which our hero began to think, what kind of person is this named Lu? Because judging by his subordinate, nothing good can come from him. And if he kills them now, it will complicate his plans. He first needs to find mutant. Meanwhile, The captain of the guards looked at our hero and asked what he thought about the proposal, to which our hero replied that he was not interested at all. The captain laughed and said that it didn't matter because after a couple of days our hero would come to him one day and ask for alms. After that he looked at the teenager and told him to take the position of the captain's assistant, carrier, and the guy immediately said that he was very glad that he was given such a generous offer. The bunny girl, meanwhile, looked at our hero and said that she was very ashamed that her abilities did not work. She immediately began to say, the instant power of the captain of the guards was very great, and her abilities could not influence him in any way, to which our hero replied that it's not her fault if these guys didn't die by eating the corpse of a water ghoul. Then there's definitely something strange about this place, they need to be very careful. Suddenly, a young man began to approach our heroes and said that they had just angered the guards, so they definitely would not be allowed into the technological university. The guy was all in torn clothes, and addressed our hero by name, saying that he should go with him. Chun was surprised and asked how this guy knew him and why he was helping them, to which the boy replied that his name was Meow and he was Closed roommate, and they met when they were together at school. Meanwhile, the security captain ordered one of his subordinates to keep an eye on the new woman and not let them escape. Inside, the captain's guard, who valued this girl and thought that during the apocalypse, such hot women as her are very rare, so they are worth their weight in gold.